Bruchem Aboyim to the sixth of the continuing shiurim on the Yud Gimel Midos Torah the Midrash. That is the 30 hermeneutical forms of exegesis by which the Torah, the written Torah, is interpreted by the sages, by Chazal. I want to go back to a point that we brought up in last week's lecture, and I want to expound and expand upon it. The Ran in the Torah, as we all recall, in Daf Gimel Bar Aleph, introduced, well, at least in this series of shiurim, introduced the notion that even something which can be derived from even a kal v'chomer, which many people would say is the most logical of the Yud Gimel Midas, nonetheless the Gemara says in Kiddushin Daf Daled and Aleph that Torah the kosav lakra. In other words, the Torah is going to even bother to write. I say bother because that's the real translation. That the Torah will even bother in writing something which can be derived through one of the Yud Gimel Midas. And the question is really, how are we supposed to understand that? The Gemara says, if it's a svara, lama lam kor. What do we need a pasuk? So, it can't be that the Torah writes things for no reason. So, and for the Ran, the chiddush of the Ran, the novel of the Ran last week was not only did we say that with respect to a kal v'chomer, but the chiddush of the Ran was that we said that with respect to all the Yud Gimel Midas. The Ran not only invoked the concept of hekesh, but the Ran in fact actually spoke about it relating to a gezeira shava. And the source of the Ran in the case of a hekesh is the Gemara itself in Gimel Aleph in the Torah. The makor of the Ran, as we saw last week, was a Gemara in Samach Aleph in Bava Metzia, and there the Ran here the Ran tells us that there the Gemara understood that even something which is derived from gezeira shava, Torah kosav lakra, the Torah will in fact actually write it. Now, I think we mentioned last week that that's not exactly what the Gemara seems to be saying. In fact, the Gemara seems to be saying exactly the opposite. The Gemara says, if I have a gezeira, what do I need the pasuk? And I think we answered by referring to the Tosfos. And Rabbi Kiva Eger on the Giddush Shas the Tosfos refers to the Ran in the Torah, that the Torah says, so why do I need the pasuk? So the Tosfos answers and says that is that there's no chiddush in the pasuk. There's nothing extra in the pasuk, meaning that, in other words, that if in fact actually we're able to, if there's no chiddush in the pasuk, then that's fine. In other words, we have no. In other words, there's no chiddush in the pasuk. Then I could say that there's something was derived from gezeira shava. But the fact is, I want to explore a little bit this concept. Why would the Torah come to write something? Why would the Torah come to write something? Torah kosav lakra, something that can derive from a kal v'chomer. Now, it appears that the principle is actually, by the Ran extended, to a Gemara in Zvachim. Now, this is what I want to speak about tonight. Tonight. The days are getting shorter, so it's not clear what it's like. The ksus yom and the rabbeinu tam, which is chayav in balayla. But in any case, there's a Gemara in Zvachim, Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis and Zayin Amud Aleph, and the Gemara there is trying to learn that the korban of Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach require matan damim ve'moil legabi yizbeach keneged ha'yisod. In other words, we have to sprinkle the blood keneged ha'yisod. So the Gemara says, Minalan, how do we know this? So Omer Rabbi Elazar, says Rabbi Elazar, right? Asya zrika mi'oila. We learn the gezeira shava from the case of oila. In other words, the case of zrika, right, appears, right, in oila, and also the Torah speaks about zrika in the case of Ma'aser and Pesach. So it says, so we learn a gezeira shava. In other words, from oila we learn a gezeira shava, right? And oila gufa minala, And with all oila, how do we know? In the case of the carbon oila, how do we know that we sprinkle the blood connected to the yisoid? So there it says explicitly, al yisoid mizbach oila. Lamed al oilas chayva shetuna yisoid. So the Gemara learns gezeira shava. It says rika with respect to carbon pesach. It says rika with respect to other kabbanis. Just like by the case of a carbon oila, the zrika is connected to yisoid. The pasuk, the scripture says it explicitly. So too, in the case of Pesach, Maisa, Bechor, the zrika, the sprinkling of blood is connected to yisoid, the bottom part of the mizbeach. So the Gemara now raises a question. So the Gemara's question is, right, that in the batanos of the dam, in the case of the oil are called shtam shem abba, which means you sprinkle it in two places at the corners and it goes to the four north, west, south, and east. So just like in the case of oila, batanas are shtam shem abba, two matanos, two sprinklings, and the sprinklings cover the four sides. Avkan shtem batanas b'shen abba. We should also have two in the case of Pesach and Meiser, which is not true. You don't see anywhere that the Korban Pesach and Meiser Bechor require Batan Shem Shem Abba. So the Gemara says, Abai Amar Lamil Lemichtav Savid Ba'oila, Savid B'chatas. So Abai says, it says Savid in the case of an oila, and Savid in the case of B'chatas. Right? Havishnei Ksuvim Haboin Ke'achad. Both the Chatas and the oila are Shtaim Shem Abba. But it says Saviv, meaning Shtaim Shem Abba, in the case of a Chatas, in the case of an oila. But, you know, it says in the case of an oila, in the case of a chatas, which is called shtei ksuvim ba'am ke'echad. In other words, both psukim are telling me the same thing. So if you have two psukim telling you the same din, we don't infer to other things, which means that since we have the din of saviv with respect to oila and with respect to chatas, because it says saviv in both of them, shtaim shem alba, so we cannot infer from there to the case of Maisa, Pesach, etc., etc. So the Gemara says, "Halik lemandaba ein melamdin." Okay, this is actually machlokes the Igim Midos. If you have two psukim that say the same din, can you refer to other cases, or you say no? So according to the opinion, it says ein melamdin. You can't infer to other cases, and there's a logic behind it. Why did the Torah write something twice? Write it once and infer. Write it twice. It means only these two cases. But there's an opinion that says you can infer to other cases. So the Gemara says, Be'asham, it also says the same thing, right? Asham is shloisha, you have three psukim, Asham, chatas, and oila, and therefore, certainly, everybody agrees en malamda. Okay, now.
What's the difference qualitatively between two psukim and three psukim, so to the view that holds...
We'll have to speak about that. The question is, when do you say enough is enough? After two or after three? Maybe chazaka, I don't know. We'll have svaras in that. It's a machlokes. Now, it's interesting that Rashi raises a question here in the Gemara. Rashi says, in Dibur HaMaschil, on some of Nun Zayim and Aleph, Dibur HaMaschil, Ein Melamdin, so Rashi says, Va'afal gab dahacha la b'binyan al anaboim l'lmoid. What are you talking about? We're not trying to learn the din of Mais and Bechor and Pesach from a binyan av. What was our limud? Our limud was a gezeira shava. Zrika. A binyan av fell out of the sky. Rashi's bothered by that question. Very rarely that Rashi has a kasha in the Gemara. I guess in New Gimel Midos, you have to have a kasha. Rashi says, "Va'aval gab dahachalav binyan avad on lumbod." Even though the sugi begins with Rabbi Elazar, who's not learning to the case of Bechor, Maisa, and Pesach through a binyan av, he's learning to a gezeira shava. So therefore, why should the existence of other two psukim, why should that interfere with the gezeira shava? Right? Why should it shtel? Why should the binyan av shtel interfere with the gezeira shava that the Gemara set up between Olam, between Pesach, Maisa, and Bechor? Yeah.
I mean, Rashi's saying the question is a good question. Why is the Shen Abba? But the answer is not. The answer is only binyan av answer.
Right. No, we give a binyan av, but we have a gezeira shava. We have a gezeira shava. And gezeira zolametza. So Rashi says, Ashmu'in and Abaya. Right. Abaya is the one who who brings the binyan av objection. So Abai is telling me a chiddush. Ashvira Abaye. The shnei kesuvim abayim ke'echad ein melamdin. If you have two pesukim, habayim you have two pesukim telling me the same din. It's one of the Yud Gimel Midos, right? Ein melamdin. We do not infer, we do not learn on the basis of two pesukim would say the same din. Afilo gezeira shava oise dover shenichta b'shneim. Even if we have a gezeira shava, even though we have a gezeira shava in oila, right? Zrika, nonetheless, we don't learn from a binyan av. That's what Rashi says. So it's an incredible thing here. The incredible thing is that I can learn a gezeira shava independent of the binyan av. And Rashi says that somehow the din ein melamdin, the binyan av, overdoes or knocks out any gezeira shava which I have. Now, this question is actually the Gemara. The same Gemara appears in Samach Dalet Amud Beis. I'm going a little bit fast now, but I trust that many people are reading Daf Yomi. So, in Psachim, on Daf Samach Dalet Amud Beis, I'm going a little fast, but I assume that with the Daf Yomi everybody knows Shas. So, Baruch Hashem. I mean,
But Daf Yomi everyone has art scroll.
Yeah, but for 40,000 people dancing in Madison Square Garden, where were they dancing? But some of them do shots, right? Well, why would you be dancing? Because you're red. Now, so it says like this: the Gemara in Psachim brings the gezeira shava of zrika from oila, okay, but doesn't bring the objection of Abaye regarding the binyan av. That's missing from the Gemara. So naturally, Tosfos fills it in. So I'm reading from the Tosfos, Samach Dalet Amud Beis, 464 side B in your art scrolls. Asya zrika meyoila. So and once again, the Gemara brings the gezeira shava without Abaye's statement doesn't appear. So Tosfos makes note there of the fact, in Dibra Maskal Asya zrika meyoila, Tosfos makes note of the fact that in Ezel Mekoimam, Abaye raised an objection. Says Tosfos, Beperek Ezel Mekoimam, Polech v'nelef mi'oila. The Gemara asks a question. Let's learn from oila. Ma oila shtaim shem abba av Pesach. Umishani. The Torah is calling the Gemara. The Gemara answers by saying, Amar Abaye, Lami lemichta tzovi ba'oila tzovi b'chatas, havu shtei ksumim ba'im ke'echad, ve'ein melamdim. Okay. The kasha, the Ri asks a question. Denogli afilim mishtei ksumim ba'im ke'echad, b'mamatzina, but the Lord calls it chad minei b'chor ma'isru Pesach, the gezeira shava, ne'elach shava me'oila, then gezeira shava lemetza. Let's learn from the gezeira shava. In other words, the Ri asked the same question from his zaydir, from his grandfather Rashi. And the Rashi was a grandfather to Ri, right? So the Ri is okay, right? So he asked a kasha. He doesn't refer to Rashi. Okay. Now, v'oimer Ri, says the Ri, Dal kochacha ashim v'chatas d'chsibu saviv d'amirin hasam da v'shneksum u'shloish ksuvim yalfina migzeira shava me'oila o yoila yalfa mineil. Says the Ri an incredible thing. In other words, in oila it says you said on his beya mizbacha oila. Now, in Chattas and Asham, it says Soviv like it says in Oila, which means there's a gezeira shava that's linking Oila, Chattas, and Asham. Oila, Chattas, and Asham are linked by this gezeira shava of Soviv. So says the Ri, right? That, right? V'hashta as a shape. Also, dumia the kasabu saviv, kamamayit, the isbu gezeira shava ketipirashte. In other words, the adamazi avul shtek suvam boim ke'echad lemuute de lo neila b'gezeira shava. Also, the dumia the kasabu saviv, kamamayit isbu gezeira shava ketipirashte. What the Tosfos is saying is the following thing: that this is not just Shnei Ksubam Ke'echad. These are Shnei Ksubam which have a shava between them. kesuvim, shnei kesuvim that the gezeira shava between them, right? You can't learn from that. In other words, the gezeira shava between oila, chatas, and asham interferes with the gezeira shava between oila and Pesach, and the Gemara calls that shnei kesuvim ein melamdim. Now, the fact is that one can fit.
Did Tosfos discover this gezeira shava?
Right. Now, what's interesting is that when I read you the Rashi, I said the Rashi says ein melamdim afilu b'gezeira shava oisei dava shenichtav b'shneihem. One can actually fit this into the Rashi too, and Baruch Hashem, Batzasa Lechaver, in the Asefa Skenim, I'll say the Kotchem, which was of course put together by the Chafetz Chaim, Zekatzang Lefrocha, the Chayk Nasan, who I think is the Shilta Gibayre, the Chayk Nasan, and actually Rav Wansburg in the Durham actually says Ayin Chayk Nasan. As Chayk Nasan, I'm going to argue on the line, but the Chayk Nasan says this pshat in Rashi. The Chayk Nasan says that if I have, let's say, shnei kesuvim, 2 psukim that tell me a certain din, okay? The question is, can I learn something from these 2 kesuvim if I have a gezeira shava? For example, I have A and B that tell me din X. Now, the question is, can I say that C is din X? So the Chayk Nasan says, is that really you can. In other words, if A and B, like this, only if A and B have a gezeira shava between them, can I not make a gezeira shava from either A or B to C. But, for example, says the Chayk Nasan, and it brings ayahs, isn't there, from other places in Shas. But for example, if I could learn, let's say, B from A through a Kal V'chomer, or I could learn, let's say, B from A through a binyanar. In other words, if I have any other than Midas connected between A and B, I could learn a gezeira shava. And he brings a raya from a Tosfos and Lamed Daled and Kiddushin, but I want to, you can believe him, but I'm saying I want to focus on this thing like this. In other words, I have 2 things, 2 kesuvim that tell me the same din. A tells me din X, B tells me din X. So the Yud Gimel is telling me that since I have 2 verses telling me the same din, so I can't learn that X applies in C. That's a cloud. Now, what if A and B are related through a midah? For example, I could learn B from A through a Kal V'chomer or through a binyanar. And certainly they're not related through a midah. And I have a gezeira shava between, let's say, A and C, or between B and C. So then I could apply the gezeira shava. Well, I think in other words I could say that since A and B are only related to a binyanar, so what I could do is I could use the gezeira shava between B and C to learn the din X and C, and I don't say shnei kesuvim ke'echad ein melamdim, because the gezeira shava is stronger than that midah. But if I have, and this is what clearly the Tosfos is saying in Pesachim, and clearly what the Chayk Nasan is learns, if I have a gezeira shava between A and B, right? If I have a gezeira shava A and B, then I can't learn a gezeira shava between B and C. And I'll say,
If there's 2 verses covered.
in other words, if I have A and B that are connected with the gezeira shava, like in the case over here we have chatas and oila are connected with the gezeira shava of Safed. Now the Gemara didn't say that. The Tosfos, like you said, the Tosfos made it up. But Tosfos also always makes up midas. That even in Samach Aleph and Aleph, the Tosfos makes up a klal prat klal that doesn't exist in the Gemara. There's some klal prat klal. The Tosfos says, how come there's no din of karka by Triebitz? Tosfos is a klal prat klal doesn't appear in the Gemara. But that's okay. Tosfos can make up a midah because they claim it's in Shas. But
what does that mean? They claim it's in Shas.
In the Gemara, the Tosfos, when I think Tosfos makes a midah means if the Shas says something, Tosfos can claim the Shas learning it through a midah, klal prat klal. They won't make up a new halachos, but they'll. But in other words, what Tosfos is saying is that if I have A and B are linked by a gezeira shava, that I can't make the gezeira shava to C. And that'll stay Shnei Kesuvim Baim Ke'echad Ein Melamdim, or Shlosha. Here I have to have a gezeira shava actually between three of them, between Chatzos and Rasha. That's what the Chod Nasan says. Okay? Now,
That's code for saying they're a gezeira shava. Shnei Kesuvim Baim Ke'echad, they are a gezeira shava, which cannot be.
that's what the Gemara is saying. Whereas the Gemara says Shnei
That's what
Kesuvim Baim
it means. It's gotta
Ke'echad.
be a matagi, what it means.
No, that's what it generally means.
No.
It's usually
But
the two Pesukah are not related to a Midah. But what the Chod Nasan is saying is an incredible thing. The Chod Nasan is saying is that if the A and B are related to a Midah, I could learn a gezeira shava from either A or B to C. But if they're related to a gezeira shava, I can't learn a midah from A and B to C. That's what the Chod Nasan is saying. Now, I would like to explore this then. Why is this? It's very interesting. Because this seems to sort of like, I think that this sugya sheds an incredible light as how are the midrash related. Now, I would say the following thing. First of all, we have an interesting Gemara. The Gemara says in Samach Aleph, we saw Malach Mitzvah. First of all, we have this Gemara. Let's go back to Kedusha. The Gemara says something that can be learned from a gezeira shava, a Torah for cost of lakor. Okay, let's think empirically, hashkafically, simple. Something which I could learn through a kal v'chaymer. Why would the pasuk write it? So it must be. You could say two answers. One answer you could say is that the Torah write it, but at the end I'll find something to learn from the pasuk that I couldn't learn from the kal v'chaymer. I think there in Kedusha the Gemara makes an attempt to learn what's socher, whatever it is. But you could say even something I think broader. If I have a midah from which I can derive a din, and then I have a pasuk, the pasuk says becomes miyuta, becomes extra. Otherwise, I can dash in the pasuk for something else. In other words, once I have a midah, chalameli. So even though there's nothing, in other words, even though there's nothing intrinsically extra in the pasuk, since I have a midah that can produce the same din of the pasuk, it must be that the entire pasuk, in a certain sense, is extra. Okay? Now, I would claim, based upon the Gemara Mabatzia that we've seen, we'll see how it works in a little while, that din applies to, let's say, for example, a midah which has a rational component. For example, a kal v'chaymer. In other words, I have a kal v'chaymer, which is an empirical law, has an empirical logic to it. So I could say Torah because of lakor, because the Torah basically is writing a pasuk on the basis of which I can see the pasuk says as being extra. Because if I have a svara, what do I need a pasuk? The pasuk has to be used for something else. In particular, I could use the pasuk for gezeira shava. Because we know that gezeira shava, there's a machlekes, and we spoke about this last time, but the gezeira shava requires, at least for the most part, some word which is extra on one side. Mufna, either mitzad echad, shnei stadin. So in other words, if I have a binyan so here the two pesukim, in other words, I have A and B. I can derive B from A using a binyan or using a gezeira shava. So it must be that B is like a little bit extra. So since B is a little bit extra, I can make a gezeira shava between B and C. Everybody with me? In other words, I have two ksuvim, A and B. And generally we say on a logical principle, I can't derive C from A and B because it's shnei ksuvim b'hem ke'echad. But since I have a logical midah, which tells me I don't really need B because I have a binyan or a kal v'chaymer to derive B from A, so B becomes a little bit extra, musa, extra, mutar. And because of that, I can now apply gezeira shava to derive something about C. So for example, use our case over here. I have chattas and oila, And let's make believe, chas v'shalom, that there was no word shava that appeared both by chatas and oila. But I had some gezeira shav, I had some type of binyan av, or kal v'chayma, in which I can derive oila or chatas from oila. So on this din, so chatas becomes like a little bit extra, not really chatas, I can learn from oila. So, because of that, I can learn a gezeira shava. From, let's say, chatas to say. That makes clear. In other words, so that would be, that would be the biur here, the taisvus, the way the chodnos is learning the Rashi too. In other words, that the midah makes the din in a pasuk extra, and that extraness in the pasuk allows me for gezeira shava. Okay? Because right now, but what if the two things are linked through a gezeira shava? In other words, why do I say if B can be derived from A through a kal v'chayma or through a binyan av, I see B as extra because it's a svara, so I can derive the svara, and therefore it's a bit extra. I can learn the gezeira shava from B to C. But what if A and B are related through a gezeira shava? I can't say B is extra. Because the Tosfos said, the Samach Alpha, have a gezeira shava, you can't say there's anything extra. And what Tosfos says, by definition, Samach Alpha and Aleph, the ones I have a gezeira shava that tells me something, and the pasuk is there can't be anything extra in the pasuk. In other words, this din of svala, lamed lekra, doesn't apply to a gezeira shava. Gezeira shava is not a svala. So in other words, if I have a gezeira shava between A and B, I hope you're following. If I have a gezeira shava, it's very simple. I have a gezeira shava between A and B, but the presence of the gezeira shava doesn't tell me that A or B are extra. Like Taisha says, and Bump says, along without it. I forget. The Torah tells me it's not extra. So since it's not extra, I can't make a gezeira shava between either A and B and C. Maybe I can make a logical argument. Shnei kesuvim, ein malaptim. Everybody with me? So in other words, we see here an incredible thing. That the presence of a gezeira shava between two things, and not, if I have a gezeira shava which I can learn them, and the din is nettless plus it anyway, the pasuk is totally not extra. Okay, so now, we see from this, what do we see from this? That gezeira shava is completely different from the other midas. The other midas have a logical component to them. And therefore, I have this dichotomy or duality between mind, text, svara, kra. So, that's good. Torah, the cost of lakra. Why did the Torah write it despite it? Because eventually, I could use the pasuk, maybe for example, shava, or some other limud. There is a chiddush in the pasuk. But in a gezeira shava, I don't say that. A gezeira shava has no logical component. Like Rashi says, it's like it's mamish written. So, in other words, since it's mamish written, so if I can derive something from gezeira shava, and the Torah nonetheless writes it, then that pasuk cannot totally, like Tosfos says, there can't be anything. The Torah is called irreducible. Irreducible. It's not up for drasha. It's lost its identity for a drasha. So because of this, I can't possibly use this word and learn it then to something else from a gezeira shava. That I think is the biur in the Tosfos and the chodnos. Now,
So does it mean we never find laws being learned like transitively through consecutive?
no, there are laws in kachim. We say ein lo min olam. It's a different issue. But I'm saying, but gezeira shava we don't say. In other words, in this transitive law, we're saying we're distinguishing between all the other midas and between gezeira shava. In other words, what I wanted to get at over here is that the gezeira shava if I have a gezeira shava and nonetheless the Torah writes it, so the pasuk is totally irreducible. In other words, I can't look at the pasuk, I can't use the pasuk to another gezeira shava. Or like Tosfos says, there's nothing extra in the pasuk, which means that, in other words, what makes the pasuk extra? If it could somehow be derived through svara, we see that the gezeira shava negates all svara, which means, really, what is a gezeira shava? A gezeira shava creates a whole new text. That's what a gezeira shava does. When Rashi says it's as if the gezeira shava is written in the Torah, it means that the gezeira shava is not at all a logical principle. It's a text. And the Torah says the same, and the Torah ends up writing it. So we have to say that, according to Tosfos, I mean, this is all Shitas Tosfos, Tosfos Shitas, and Samach Al Marala, we'd have to say that you wouldn't say, if you say Tov v'Katz of v'Korah, you'd have to just say then what? Is that the Torah is saying something which is irreducible, and we can never use any form of exegesis. That's what we're saying. Which means, what I want to get out is the following thing, which I think is important, is that the gezeira shava, operationally, is a text compared to the other mitzvahs. In other words, if I have A and B can be learned from A through one of the mitzvahs, let's say, not gezeira shava, so the gezeira shava itself will, on the basis of the logical principle, will establish itself and look at the pasuk as being extra. But if some of the gezeira shava knows that the din is learned through a gezeira shava, it won't. It can't be applied. Now, from this we get an interesting thing, because you could ask the question we spoke about in the previous class, previous shiur, that in other words, there's a hekesh in the gezeira shava. Now, it's clear, I mean, I think the gezeira shava has been an exception. It's clear to me that, for example, if there was a hekesh between A and B, which is really a certain type of a vidyan of, then you could apply a gezeira shava. Which means that what I'm saying is that we see that this principle of, in other words, logic versus texts, and the relative logic between two things, in other words, this is actually a principle which the Gemara uses in different sugyas. This notion. Now, I want to go just one step further, and then we're going to come to really the main part of what I want to speak about. The Gemara says, if I can learn B from A, so it's mashma with the Gemara, I still say, Shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad, ein melamdim. That's what's mashma with the Gemara. In other words, no, what's mashma with the Gemara like that, what mashma with the Chutnasan is, if I have two pesukim, B and A, right, I'll still say, Shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad, ein melamdim, unless it's a gezeira shava. Okay? But if I have, if they're connected with the gezeira shava, I won't say it. Which means, what does this mean? What it means is that shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad. In other words, it doesn't only mean, the Torah says two dinim, so it must be the Torah meant b'dafka only this place and the places too. In other words, even if I had two dinim, one of which can be derived through a logical principle, I'll still say the same thing too. Which means that Shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad also has a logical dimension. In other words, even if the second din I can derive from a principle for the first din, right? Nonetheless, I'll treat it as Shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad. I can learn from it. Which means the following thing. It means that the logical principle creates a text. Because the Shnei kesuvim abam ke'echad, I can say ein melamdim, right? Whether the two are independent or the two are logically connected. In other words, if I have two things not logically connected, so I have a svara. Well, why does the Torah say two things? It must be the Torah made the dafka needs to be in other places. But you see, if I have a logical principle connected me with A and B, you can't say the svara. You can't say the svara. Well, the Torah said two things in two places. It's not true. The Torah said only thing in one place. I can derive with logic into another place. I mean, what was the Torah doing? If God said two things, I could say, well, he said two things. Say one thing, I should derive it. Say two things, only in these cases. But here, God didn't say exactly one thing. He said really one thing. And even though he said it in two places, I could have used my cycle, my intellect to derive it in another place too. So what did God say? Did he say two things in one thing? So, the conclusion is we treat it as steak suvin. We say that God said two things, which means that what? That even though I could derive B through a kal v'chomer and a binyan av, it's called shnei kesuvin, which means God said two things. What do you mean God said two things? It means that something derived from a kal v'chomer or binyan av is called something that God said. Now, he didn't say it so loud because he didn't say it like he said it two things derived through gezeira shava. So maybe like he said it and, maybe he spoke loud, spoke soft, but what I'm saying is, it's called a text. But there's a hierarchy of texts. There's a text of binyan av, a text of kal v'chomer, which is a text, which means it's a text for certain midas, but not for other midas. And then there's a strong text, which is called the gezeira shava text. That's irreducible. So, what's interesting is that the midas all create a hierarchy of texts. And depending upon the strength of the midah, whether it's a logical principle, like a binyan av, or gezeira shava, or whether it's a gezeira shava, that will determine what type of text is created, and this will have important implications in the Chazal themselves. That's all I want. That's the main point. In other words, we see very clearly over here the notion that gezeira shava is like it's mamash written in the Torah. Now, I wanted a little bit just to. We mentioned too last time is that we had this problem with the Ran claim that the Gemara in the Dorim was the Gemara Bava Metzia was claiming that even a gezeira shava tov akasav lakha. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says, why do I need why do I need the gezeira shava? Right? The Gemara says, the Gemara said in Bava Metzia, what are the gezeira shava for? Like the pasuk. The Taisus has another question. If I have the gezeira shava, so what do you need the pasuk? So Taisus says the pasuk has nothing extra. That's what Taisus says. Meaning that in no case of Torah because of Lekron, Taisus would learn there is something extra in the pasuk. But it's very interesting. Why should the Gemara say that in fact, if I have the pasuk, why do I need the gezeira shava? And Taisva says, well, now that so what about the pasuk though? You have to consider the pasuk. So it seems like this. Now, Taisva's understood that the gezeira shava is like something mamash written. It's not a logical principle. So it's mamash written. So where did the pasuk? The answer is no, because the pasuk is called irreducible. There's certain psukim that you can't use the psukim in any way to derive any other principle from them. There's something called mamash pshuta shamikra. There's no connection with the Torah Shabbat. Right? In other words, there's nothing extra, which means is that if you look at that Gemara in Samach Aleph, what is Ravina learning? He's learning from actually the real Pasuk, the Pasuk. In other words, Ravina in Bava Metzia and Samach Aleph is not using, according to Taisvus, is not using any logical step in learning a thing from a Pasuk. Now, he certainly, Pasuk actually explicitly said that. What he did was he took two words and put them together. the limit is he took two words and placed them next to each other. So what was Ravina doing? He had words in a pasuk, and what he did was, he just knows that two words are adjacent. The drasha had no connection with meaning. It was purely the adjacentness of two letters. In other words, Ravina was not taking the pasuk and translating it to concepts and deriving a halacha. He was looking at the black and white on the cloth. And notice that what? Two words are adjacent. And on the base of that, what did he do? He learned the pshat. Which means, Ravina was learning a pshat that has absolutely nothing to do with the logical structure of the pasuk. It purely has to do with the fact that words are adjacent. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's an interesting Tosfos in Lamed Aleph and Sukkah. Tosfos wants to claim that a hekesh, you don't need a rebbe, you can derive a hekesh by yourself. They argue on Rashi. There's absolutely a kiva ega there. Right? And Tosfos says, if smuchim, you can use misvara, so hekesh too you use misvara. But really, what's the hekesh of Tosfos? The hekesh of Tosfos there has nothing to do with a logical hekesh. I claim and I mentioned this before, when Tosfos uses hekesh there, just think about the fact that the Abba Minim appear one after another in one pasuk, right? Priyetz Hadar, right? Kapos Tamarim. In other words, if I just look at the letters, the black letters on the white cloth, and they're next to each other, there's no principle. The letters next to each other, in itself, is equality. And then I can do myself. I don't need a midah. It's a pure observation of black and white and how letters are written on a cloth. So, in other words, when Tosfos says a pasuk is reducible, what is reducible, irreducible? What Tosfos means is no condition in the pasuk. All there is the black and white, and I read the words. That's what Tosfos means. And Ravina, when he came up with the drasha, just noticed that two words were next to each other. That observation has nothing to do with any logical understanding of the terms or of the meaning of the verse. It's an observation how the thing is written. So therefore, even if there's a gezeira shava, that remains. So we see that there's something called ground level text in Chazal. And what's ground level text in Chazal? The actual letters appearing on the cloth is a little like the Torah codes. The Torah codes basically take letters next to each other. It has nothing to do with what the Torah is saying. And they take a computer and discover all types of silly things which have nothing to do with anything in Judaism. And after that, people use it. Wow, kiruv, this and that. But I'm saying is, like, reveal like a Torah code. A Torah codes work because we're not bucking chases v'seivas. I don't see where the Torah codes work because how do you know how to count the letter? It works. You see,
this is a right that we have to get the right one.
Or maybe it's raya that basically you could teach any stupid, you could make any silly thing, and get people to believe you. I don't know what that. But in other words, I say don't confuse this with the Torah codes. The Torah codes, claim that throughout the entire text there's things, but I'm sure there's places with this chaseres v'seivos. I don't see how the Torah codes could possibly, claim anything about true. I mean, we have a suffix. I mean, the Shachas Ayis will make a bracha. We don't make a bracha because of that. I mean, there's a mitzvah like that. But in other words, to come along, I think the Torah codes are still the Chazal. Mashenken here, we're connecting words that are next to each other, and we can't say you don't need, it's obviously a place where there's no chaseres, no possibility. So therefore, we can take letters and put them next to each other. Okay, fine. Okay, what have I said? The bottom line. The bottom line is, what I wanted to prove, just use results that we spoke about the last series shiurim, that in fact the midas create a text, but there's different types of texts. There's a text created by a binyanah. There's a text created by a chava. There's a text created by a gezeira shava. And there's a hierarchy a spectrum of texts. There's strong texts and there's weak texts. The Kal V'chomer is a weak text. The Binyan Av is a weak text. A gezeira shava is a strong text. So, in Binyan Av and Kal V'chomer, it's a weak text. So the weak text can exist along the Chumash, which is a strong text. Therefore, the Chumash can be extra. And a gezeira shava, which is a strong text. So what do you have left in the Chumash? You have the black and white of the letters. That's the text of the Chumash. Okay? It might be interesting that the Gemara Yerushalmi says that first the Torah was given with white letters on black smoke, and then black letters on white smoke. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I'm sure that the Darshanim have different ways of understanding that. But in other words, sometimes I thought that in fact actually, in other words, the black letters on the white smoke is the Torah Shabbat that we see, and then we have the Midos. That's the way because we operate like that. But we spoke about last week that actually Chazal operate the other way. In other words, we see you have a Kal V'chomer, it's a the Torah. So what do the Midas look before the text? In other words, we have the Midah after the text. When you say that the Torah writes things, Torah because of Lakra, what does the Midah look before that? So maybe the Midah looks before that, white letters on black smoke. That could possibly be the Pshat in Chazal. Okay, now, what I want to do is I want to begin the next issue, which I think we're going to have to seriously consider is that I've been claiming all along that, in fact, actually, in other words, we spoke about Hillel darshaning the 7 midas, the Shabbat midas. In the case of Kal V'chomer, where you need a gezeira, in Kal V'chomer, gezeira. So, the fact is that we spoke about what was the gezeira. The gezeira was the hakesh. And comes the gezeira shava, right, and replaces the hakesh. And that was Hillel's chivulus, his novel thing. So now, one could say, what are we talking about? First of all, I mean, there are plenty of Gemaras, designing with Aleph and Tamura, where Chazal, actually someone raised a question about this last week, Chazal speak about gezeira shava from Moshe Rabbeinu. There's an entire Gemara and Tamura that says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter, there were thousands of gezeira shavas, Kal V'chomers, all these were forgotten. So really, I want to speak about two questions. In other words, first of all, according to what I'm saying, this Gemara should obviously be a contradiction. I mean, when we speak about gezeira shavas, this is way before Hillel. And if you want to learn and let's go the opposite way. So what did Hillel do? What was he doing? Shabbat midas. That's number one. But number two, the interesting question is, a gezeira shava I understand. It's textual. You forget things. A Kal V'chomer is logic. People stop thinking. In other words, everybody agrees that Kal V'chomer can be dirty by yourself. What is it to forget? Bishlam gezeira shava, you forget. Okay, it's a text, it's a puzzle. But a Kal V'chomer, how do you forget a Kal V'chomer? A Kal V'chomer is a logical thing. One can always derive it. On the contrary, the Gemara says, Asnil ben Kanaz, they forgot it, and Asnil Kanaz re-derived it through Pilpul. What through Pilpul? What can be more? I mean, how through Pilpul are you going to derive a Kal V'chomer? Kal V'chomer itself is a logical thing. What type of Pilpul is the Gemara speaking about? Okay? In addition to that, the Gemara says in the daf before that before Moshe Rabbeinu, they learned differently after Moshe Rabbeinu. Before Moshe Rabbeinu, for a certain time in Jewish history, they learned like Moshe Rabbeinu. They learned differently. The Gemara says, you're down with base. The question is, if they learned differently, it's why you call it gezeira shava Kal V'chomer. They learned obviously the same. So clearly, we're left with a very, very difficult question, is how do we understand this in the perspective of history?
Where's this going to?
Tezayin and Aleph, and the Gemara says, I think you down with base, or Tezvav with base, the Gemara speaks about there. I don't have the Gemara's word in front of me. Maybe they bring. Oh yeah, fine, very good. I thought I'd forgotten it. Let me just say before the camera stops, there's a race against the camera. Right.
You win.
The Gemara says, this whole Gemara appears in Tezayin and Aleph in Tabula. And the other Gemara appears in Tezvovim and Beis in Kabbalah. Gemara explains how they used to learn by Moshe Rabbeinu before afterwards. The question is, let's go back again. What happened? Where did all this come from? Okay? Yemir Hashem, that will be the discussion for next week until next week for an unsolicited positive Shami Rakodesh, Kol Tuv.